The first thing you need to understand is that I almost didn't go back. I'd been stationed at Vthara Prime for 11 months by the time Cadet Myra Vasquez showed up at our training outpost, and those 11 months had done something to me. Not broken me, I want to be clear about that, but they'd filed down certain edges, made me quieter, more careful about what I said out loud, especially around the alien cadets who shared our barracks, because the things I said out loud had a habit of making them go very still in the way that prey animals go still when they sense something large moving through the grass nearby. I am Liaison Officer Deck Harmon, 2nd Tier, Interstellar Defense Academy, and I am telling you this story because someone should. Because what happened during the Vthara storm season of 2387 was the kind of thing that gets filed away in incident reports and never actually understood by the people reading those reports. Numbers on a page, meteorological data, cadet wellness assessments. None of it captures what I saw. None of it captures Myra. So let me start where it actually started, which was not the day the storm came, but 3 weeks before it, on a Tuesday morning that smelled like copper and something faintly sweet. The way Vthara Prime always smells after the night condensation burns off the landing pads. I was standing outside the main intake hangar watching a transport shuttle from Earth's Western Hemisphere Academy disgorge its payload of new cadets, and I had a cup of coffee in my hand that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and I was thinking about nothing in particular. The alien cadets lined up in their respective formations across the field. Veth cadets, with their tall, reedy frames and the bioluminescent patches along their collarbone that flickered when they were nervous, which was always. Crawl cadets, squat and dense, their secondary eyelids halfway closed against Vthara's pale sun, their movements slow and deliberate in the way that all crawl movements were slow and deliberate because their home planet's gravity was 3 times standard. Dulhari cadets, moving in the loose, shoulder-touching clusters their species preferred, communicating in the micro-vibrations they passed through physical contact, because they'd evolved in environments where sound carried predators to you. And then the humans. 10 of us total in that intake. I'd read the files. Standard mix: 3 from East Asia, 2 from West Africa, 1 from the Nordic territories, 2 from the Americas, 1 from the Pacific Islands, 1 from Central Asia. Young, 22 to 25 years old. Bright-eyed in that specific way that Earth Academy graduates are bright-eyed, which is different from the bright-eyed of cadets from easier worlds. Earth's bright-eyed has something underneath it, something that's been tested. Myra Vasquez came off the shuttle 7th. She was 23, 5'6", brown skin, dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, a small scar above her left eyebrow that wasn't in her file photo, so she must have gotten it recently. She was carrying her duffel over one shoulder like it weighed nothing, and she was looking at the sky. Not at the outpost, not at the formation markers, not at me, which is where the other cadets were looking, because I was the one standing there in a liaison officer's gray jacket holding a cold cup of coffee. She was looking at the sky. I followed her gaze. Vthara's sky was doing what it does in the pre-storm season, running these long horizontal streaks of deep violet cloud across the upper atmosphere, very still, very organized, the kind of formation that local meteorological briefings called Stage 1 Vthara precursor patterns, and the local population called more simply the warning fingers. The Veth have a word for it. I can't pronounce it. It translates roughly as the sky showing its teeth. Myra Vasquez looked at those clouds and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an uncertain smile. The way you smile when you step outside in the morning and the weather is exactly what you hoped for. I made a note of it, I don't know why, something about it stuck. The first week at the Vthara Prime Interstellar Defense Academy Outpost, VIDA, we called it, which sounds like a word for something alive, which I always thought was appropriate. The first week is orientation. It sounds boring when you say it like that. Orientation. But what orientation means at VIDA is something closer to controlled bewilderment. You are placed into a structured environment with beings from 11 different species, and you are expected to function as a unit. Not eventually, immediately. The IDA's operating theory is that the shock of immediate cross-species integration is more effective than gradual exposure, because gradual exposure lets you build comfortable psychological walls, and comfortable psychological walls will get you killed in actual combat operations, where Cadet Dulhari is the only one standing between you and whatever is trying to end your life on some rock 40 light-years from home. So, Day 1, Unit 7, that was us assembled in the briefing room. I want to describe this room to you because rooms matter. The briefing room at VIDA Outpost 7 was a circle. Veth architecture defaults to circles, no corners, because the dominant predator on early Vthara was a thing that lurked in corners and angles and used architectural geometry to trap its prey. And even 10,000 years after that predator went extinct, the Veth still build round rooms. The ceiling was low by human standards, high by Veth standards. The lighting was calibrated to the 17-part spectrum that all 11 species could process, which meant it looked slightly wrong to every species present: too purple for humans, too warm for Crawl, too dim for Dulhari, who prefer light intense enough to bleach fabric. The chairs were not chairs. They were contoured resting platforms calibrated to your species file, and mine had been set to human standard, which meant it was basically a chair, but with the armrests too far apart because the algorithm always adds 10 centimeters for what it calls upper limb flexibility allowances, and what I call the algorithm not understanding human proportions. 13 cadets, 7 species. Commander Vethalis ran the briefing. She was Veth, about 2 meters tall, the bioluminescent patches across her collar flickering in slow blue rhythms, which in Veth body language means concentrated attention. She'd been running orientation briefings for 6 years. She had the careful, measured tone of someone who has learned exactly how much information each species can absorb in a single sitting, and has calibrated their delivery accordingly. She covered the outpost layout, emergency protocols, the rules about the communal food preparation area, which are extensive and important because 3 of the 11 species represented at VIDA are fatally allergic to compounds produced by the metabolic processes of 2 of the other species, and the kitchen had been the site of 4 medical emergencies in the outpost's history, none fatal, all avoidable. She covered the training schedule. She covered the chain of command. Then she said, I want to address the upcoming seasonal weather event. The Veth cadets' bioluminescent patches shifted from blue to a pale, flickering amber. Nervous. The Dulhari cluster tightened, the 5 of them pressing slightly closer together, their shoulder contact increasing. Even the Crawl, whose faces were built for exactly 0 readable expression, shifted their secondary eyelids slightly. A Crawl physiologist once told me that secondary eyelid movement in Crawl is involuntary and occurs primarily in response to perceived threat. Myra Vasquez had her chin resting on her hand and was watching Commander Vethalis with the expression of someone waiting to hear something mildly interesting. Vthara Prime experiences a seasonal weather phenomenon known as the Vthari storm cycle, Commander Vethalis said. It occurs once every 14 standard months. The current cycle is estimated to begin within the next 4 to 6 weeks. All outpost personnel are required to review the emergency protocol documents in your briefing packets. Cadets from off-world should understand that the Vthari storm is classified as a Category 7 atmospheric event by the Galactic Meteorological Standards Council. She paused. For context, she added, and I noticed she looked briefly at the human cadets when she said this. Category 7 is the highest category on the GMSC scale. The amber in the Veth cadets' patches intensified. The Dulhari cluster was now close enough that they were basically one organism. A Crawl cadet in the second row made a sound I'd learned to recognize as the crawl equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. Myra Vasquez wrote something in the margin of her briefing packet. I was close enough to read it later when she left it on the seat. She had written, "Cat 7, check what that means in Earth terms." Then she'd crossed it out and written, "Ask Deck." I had not introduced myself by name. She'd read my ID tag from across the room. She found me after the briefing, while I was collecting the packets cadets had left behind. Liaison Officer Harmon. I turned. She was standing in the doorway with her hands in her jacket pockets, head slightly tilted, the way people tilt their head when they're about to ask something they've been thinking about for a while. "Vasquez," I said because I'd memorized the roster. "What can I do for you?" "The storm," she said. "Category 7. What does that actually mean? Like for a human, not the GMSC definition which I already looked up and it's mostly math." I put down the packets. "Why do you want to know?" "Because the Veth cadets looked scared," she said. "And I figure if something scares a Veth, and Veth evolved on this planet, right, so they know what this storm is, then I should understand what I'm actually dealing with." This was a good answer. Most cadets first week, first orientation, do not think this clearly. They're still processing the newness of everything. She'd already moved past the newness and was collecting tactical information. "Okay," I said. "Category 7, GMSC scale. Sustained wind velocities of 400 to 600 kilometers per hour at surface level. Atmospheric pressure drops that have been recorded cracking reinforced composite materials. The outpost structures are rated to withstand it, but you'll feel it. Electrical discharge events, which means lightning, but in volumes that don't have a great comparison point on Earth. The Vthara storm generates approximately 11,000 lightning strikes per hour at peak activity. Duration, 48 to 72 hours. Visibility at surface, functionally 0. Temperature fluctuation, plus or minus 60 standard degrees over the course of the storm, unpredictably." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. "That sounds like a bad hurricane," she said. "Plus lightning. How far underground do the outpost shelters go?" 40 meters. "That's deep enough," she said, and then, "Thanks, Liaison Officer Harmon," and she walked away. I stood there for a moment. Then I thought, she compared a Category 7 GMSC storm to a bad hurricane. A Vthara storm had, in the outpost's history, leveled 3 surface structures, killed a Veth research team that hadn't made it to shelter in time, and been listed by the Galactic Safety Council as one of the top 15 most dangerous recurring natural weather events in the explored sectors of the galaxy. She'd called it a bad hurricane, and then asked about shelter depth, practical, collected, moving on. I started to understand, a little, why the alien cadets went still when humans talked. The 3 weeks between orientation and the storm were, for Unit 7, the standard VIDA grinding routine, up at 500 by Vthara Standard Time. Physical conditioning, which was conducted in a way that attempted to be fair to all species present, which mostly meant it was deeply unfair to every species present but in different ways. The crawl cadets were being asked to perform at Earth standard gravity, which for them was like humans being asked to sprint through knee-deep water. The Dulhari cadets were being asked to operate as individuals rather than a cluster, which for them had a specific kind of psychological difficulty I don't think humans fully appreciated, because we've never evolved in a way that makes solitude feel like a physical threat. The Veth cadets were being asked to perform in the open air rather than structured interior spaces, which triggered their deeply wired architectural anxiety. And the humans, well, we were being asked to do all of this with alien beings in alien conditions on an alien world, which is not as dramatic as it sounds when you've been doing it for 11 months, but which the new cadets were still adjusting to. Myra Vasquez did not struggle. I don't mean she was the best cadet. She wasn't Cadet Yuan Jingfei, one of the other humans, outperformed her in technical systems operation, and Cadet Dulhari Prime. That was what we called the Dulhari Cluster's designated communication interface, because their actual individual names were vibrational signatures we couldn't produce, ran circles around everyone in the navigation exercises. But Myra didn't struggle. She had the quality that I've seen in people who grew up in places that didn't give them the option of struggling. An uncomplaining competence, a way of encountering difficulty, and simply beginning to work through it without any apparent emotional processing stage in between. Her file said she was from a place called Matagalpa in Nicaragua, grew up in a zone that had been repeatedly hit by Category 5 hurricanes over the course of her childhood. Her parents were agricultural workers. She'd made it to Earth Academy on a merit scholarship, which at Earth Academy means she'd been in the top 2% of her regional testing pool, which for her region meant she'd been competing against kids whose parents were also agricultural workers in a climate-ravaged zone, which meant everyone in that pool had been trained by hardship in ways that standardized testing could measure but not fully capture. She'd grown up in storms. Not metaphorically, actually, literally. She had spent portions of her childhood in storm shelters, riding out the kind of weather that, on other worlds, gets classified as a regional catastrophe. I thought about this during week 2, when we ran the standard emergency response simulation, the one where the training AI generates a crisis scenario, and the cadets have to coordinate a response across species. The scenario that day was a structural breach during an atmospheric event. I was observing from the monitoring station, watching the feeds from the simulation room. The Veth cadets froze for 4.3 seconds at the start of the scenario. That's not unusual. The freeze response is wired deep in Veth biology, and the training is partly designed to help them override it. The Dulhari cluster immediately began the contact communication process, which was effective internally, but created a bottleneck in cross-species communication. The crawl cadets moved methodically toward the designated response positions, which was correct but slow. Myra moved in the first second, not panicking, moving. She was already calling out position assignments before the freeze ended, already directing foot traffic, already reading the simulation environment for the information it was providing. Her voice had a specific quality in that moment that I noticed and that I've thought about many times since. It was not louder than normal, not higher. If anything, it was slightly lower, calm in the way that calm is not the absence of urgency, but the management of it. The scenario resolved in 11 minutes. The VIDA training standard was 14. Afterward in the debrief, Commander Vthara asked Myra what had driven her decision-making in the first 30 seconds. Myra thought about it. The light was wrong, she said. Vthara's patches flickered. Can you elaborate? In the simulation, the lighting shifted when the breach happened. There was a flicker pattern. I've been in real structural situations where lighting flickers like that. It means the power is being rerouted and you have about 90 seconds before you're on emergency backup. So I knew we had 90 seconds to get people moving before we lost the secondary guidance systems. She paused. I've been through enough real things that look like that simulation. My body just starts. My brain catches up later. The alien cadets were all looking at her. The Dulhari cluster had gone into their close contact configuration. The Veth cadets' patches were cycling through colors I didn't have the full vocabulary for, something between fascination and wariness. One of the crawl cadets, Cadet Vordak, who I'd learned in 11 months was the most communicative of the crawl, which is relative but still, made a low sound and then said, in the flat, deliberate standard galactic that crawl use, on your homeworld, you experience structural failures during atmospheric events. As a child. Myra looked at him. Yeah. And this was common, Vordak said, not a question, working through something. Where I grew up, yeah, pretty common. Vordak was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your species raises its young in disaster conditions. Some of us, Myra said, not all of us. But enough, Vortex said, that it is not considered extraordinary. Myra considered this. I guess so. Vordak looked at the other Crawl cadet. Something passed between them. In Crawl, secondary eyelids sliding halfway down and then back up is a gesture that I've been told means something like I told you so, but more complicated, more layered. Something like, I suspected this. Now I understand it more. I wrote all of this in my observer log that evening, and then sat for a while looking at what I'd written. The storm warning came on a Thursday. I know it was a Thursday because I remember that I just finished my weekly comm call with the Central Ida Liaison office, which was always Thursday morning, and I was walking back from the comm center when the Outpost's atmospheric monitoring array lit up with the kind of red that means now. Not in 4 to 6 weeks. Now, today. The Vthara storm season had moved its timeline up by almost a month, which VIDA's chief meteorologist, a Veth named R. Rellies, later explained, was the result of an upper atmosphere pressure event she'd been tracking, but had assigned a lower probability than it deserved. She said this in the flat tone of someone who was extremely disappointed in themselves. Weather prediction on Vthara is better than it used to be, but the Vthara storm has an independent quality that resists precise modeling. The locals say it moves when it wants to, which is not scientific but is, according to R. Rellies, not entirely wrong. Estimated time of arrival, 18 hours. The Outpost went into condition red. I want to describe what condition red looks like at VIDA, because this is important for understanding what happened next. Condition red means every non-essential surface structure gets its blast shields down, great composite plates that fold out from the base of each building and lock into ground anchors, turning the exterior into something that looks like a bunker. It means the landing pad's close. It means all personnel are assigned to specific shelter sections, 40 meters underground, and are expected to begin moving their essential materials there within the hour. It means the training schedule is suspended. It means Commander Vthara is everywhere at once, moving through the outpost with her patches flickering in the rapid silver-white pattern that in Veth means high functional alert. And it means the alien cadets, the ones who'd been briefed, who knew what a Vthara storm was, who came from worlds where a Category 7 GMSC event was unambiguously the worst thing that could happen to you. Those cadets showed, in their respective ways, what fear looks like when it's wearing a professional uniform. The Veth cadets moved quickly but with a specific tightness in their movements, the way people move when they're fighting the urge to run. The Dulhari cluster had contracted to its tightest configuration. All 5 of them essentially fused into a moving unit, their vibrational communication happening so fast that the air around them had a faint hum. The Crawl cadets were doing something I'd never seen Crawl do, which was moving their primary eyelids in a rapid, rhythmic pattern that Vordek later told me was an involuntary biological response in Crawl to atmospheric pressure changes. Crawl can sense weather in a way humans can't, and the Vthara storm's pressure front had been detectable for them for hours before the array lit up. I was at the main corridor junction when I saw Myra. She was standing at the junction's observation port, a reinforced window about 30 centimeters across that looked out onto the surface approach. The blast shields were going down on the exterior, but this window had a few minutes yet. She was looking out at the sky. It had changed. In the hours since orientation, the violet-streaked clouds had built into something else entirely, a wall, essentially. A horizontal cliff of atmosphere, dark in the way that things are dark when the light hitting them is being absorbed rather than reflected. The lower edge of the storm front was fraying into these long, reaching tendrils that swept across the ground, and even through the window I could hear the first sounds of it, a low, cycling moan that the wind made as it moved through the outpost surface structures. The Veth cadet behind me in the corridor made a sound I'd learned to recognize as distress. Cadet Dulhari Prime pressed themselves against the corridor wall, which put them further from the window, which was clearly where their biology wanted them to be. Myra had her nose approximately 4 inches from the glass. "Harmon," she said without turning around. She'd identified me by sound or footstep pattern or something. I'd learned not to be surprised by this. "Look at that formation, that leading edge. You see how it's running in horizontal layers? That's a wind shear pattern. We get that back home before the really big ones, like the storm is organized, like it knows what it's doing." "Vasquez," I said, "we're supposed to be moving to the shelter sections." "I know," she said. "I'm going, I just wanted to see it first." A pause. "Have you seen one before, a full Vthara storm?" "No," I said. "Last season I was at the central campus, different storm belt." "So this is your first too," she said. "That's correct." She was quiet for a moment. The moan of the wind outside had deepened. The leading cloud tendrils were now close enough that I could see the individual coils within them. The storm had a texture, an interior architecture, the way really large things always do when you're close enough. "It's beautiful," Myra said. I looked at her. "I mean it," she said. "Not in a stupid way, not like it's not dangerous, but look at it. That's one of the biggest weather events in the explored galaxy, and it's just weather. It doesn't know we're here, it's not angry, it's just a storm." She finally turned away from the window. "Okay, let's go." She walked past me toward the shelter access corridor. The Dulhari cluster flowed out of her way with a speed that suggested their instincts were fully operational. The Veth cadet pressed against the wall and watched her pass with an expression I was starting to recognize. The one that meant I cannot tell if that person is extremely brave or has something missing in their threat assessment architecture, and either way I find them difficult to categorize. I followed her and I thought, she said it's beautiful. A Category 7 GMSC storm. 48 to 72 hours of conditions that would kill an unprotected person on the surface in approximately 6 minutes. The kind of event that had killed Veth research teams. The kind of event that the local population, people who'd evolved in this weather system, who'd spent thousands of years living with it, approached with deep, wired respect and no small amount of terror. Myra Vasquez had called it beautiful and then asked if I'd seen one before, as if we were talking about a particularly interesting geological formation, and then walked to the shelter corridor at a normal pace. And somewhere in her eyes there had been something that I can only describe as delight. 40 meters underground, VIDA's storm shelters are a different world from the outpost above. They were designed by a team that included Veth, Crawl, and human architects, which means they are round, structurally dense, and slightly too warm, respectively. The walls are a composite material that absorbs the electromagnetic energy from the storm above and converts it, with about 30% efficiency, into outpost power. So every Vthara storm actually powers the outpost for several weeks after, which is one of the only nice things you can say about it. The shelters are arranged in hexagonal clusters, each cluster housing a unit, with shared common areas and individual species-specific rest areas. Unit 7's shelter cluster had 7 rooms off a central common space. Veth rooms at cooler temperatures, Crawl rooms at higher gravity simulated by floor compression plates, Dulhari rooms where the 5 cadets could cluster without triggering claustrophobia protocols, human rooms at something approximating Earth standard, and 1 room for Cadet Tavris, the 7th species in our unit, a Shalik, which is a small, quick, 6-limbed being from a high-altitude world, deeply intelligent, very private, who I'd spoken to perhaps a dozen times in 11 months and found quietly fascinating. The first 4 hours in the shelter were, if I'm honest, the hours where I saw something I hadn't quite seen before, which was a group of beings from very different worlds all experiencing fear in their own ways and not being entirely able to hide it. The Veth cadets talked more than usual. Veth do this when they're stressed. Their natural communication rate increases, as if the act of exchanging information is itself calming. They were reviewing emergency protocols, discussing structural ratings, running probability calculations out loud. I recognized this for what it was, nervous talking, filling the silence before the storm arrived. The Dulhari cluster sat in their room with the door open and the shared common space visible. They wanted enclosure, but couldn't handle full separation from the group. The hum of their vibrational communication was constant, low, like a generator running in the walls. The Crawl cadets, Vordek and his unit mate, Cadet Gresh, were motionless. Crawl process fear internally. They go still. Their secondary eyelids were fully down. I'd learned this was not sleep but something adjacent to it, a deep internal state management technique that Crawl use in situations they cannot control. Vordek had explained it to me once. When the storm is coming and nothing I do changes whether it comes, then what I do is go inside myself and wait. It is the only logical response. This had been said with the flat certainty that Crawl bring to all observations, but I'd thought at the time that there was something very wise in it. Myra was in the common space. She had her datapad out and she was reading something. I came out of my duty check and found her sitting cross-legged on one of the Veth-contoured seats, which was the wrong shape for a human, but she'd wedged herself into it in a way that seemed comfortable enough. And she was reading. And she had a cup of something warm in her hand that smelled like coffee, but wasn't. Vthara synthesizer made something that had caffeine and heat, and approximately the correct color, but landed in the mouth like coffee's well-intentioned cousin. I sat down across from her. "Can't sleep," I said. "It's not sleep time," she said without looking up. "It's 1400. Most of the unit is trying." "Yeah," she turned a page on the datapad. "Gresh and Vordek have it right, I think. That thing Crawl do, the stillness thing. I kind of wish I could do that." "My brain doesn't turn off like that." She looked up. "Does it bother you that you can't go still when you're scared?" "I manage," I said. "I used to try to sleep through storms when I was a kid," she said. "My mom said it was the only way, just sleep through it and wake up after, but I couldn't. I'd lie there listening to the wind and I'd end up liking it, the sound of it. There's something in big weather that I don't know. It's hard to explain to people who didn't grow up with it." "Try," I said. She thought for a moment. "When I was 9, we had a hurricane come through, Category 4. One of the bad ones that year. It was a bad season. My family went to the community shelter, which was a school gymnasium about 2 kilometers from our house, and we spent 3 days there while the storm moved through. And the noise was, there's no word for the noise a Category 4 hurricane makes when you're inside a shelter listening to it. It's not loud the way a machine is loud. It's loud the way the earth is loud. Like the entire planet is doing something, and you're just this small thing caught in the middle of it." She stopped. "And," I said. "And I wasn't scared," she said. "I mean, I was scared, but under the scared I felt something else, like I was part of something huge. Like the storm was real and the shelter was real and my family was real, and for those 3 days nothing was small or boring or irrelevant, because the storm made everything immediate. Everything mattered. Every decision about where to sleep and what to eat and who to sit next to, all of it was real." She paused. "I know that sounds wrong. Most people who went through that remember it as trauma. And you remember it as alive," she said. "I remember feeling alive." She went back to her datapad. I sat there for a while, listening to the first distant sounds of the Vthara storm hitting the surface above us. Through 40 meters of composite and rock, it arrived as a vibration, deep, cycling, immense. I thought about what she'd said. I thought about Cadet Vordek going inside himself. I thought about the Veth cadets talking faster. I thought about the Dulhari cluster pressed together, taking comfort in contact. And I thought about a 9-year-old girl in a gymnasium in Nicaragua, listening to a Category 4 hurricane, and feeling alive. 14 hours into the storm, something broke. Not the outpost held. The blast shields held. The 40-meter rock overhead held. What broke was Cadet Finale, the youngest of the Veth cadets, 21 years old, who had grown up in the sheltered interior valleys of Vthara's equatorial continent, and for whom the Vthari storm was not childhood memory but adult encounter, first time, no reference point. I heard it from across the common space. A sound that I'd learned was the Veth equivalent of panic, a rapid, high-pitched harmonic, the bioluminescent patches firing in rapid, arrhythmic bursts of white-yellow light, very different from the controlled blue-amber patterns of normal Veth stress response. It was involuntary. It was the body overriding the mind. Finale was standing in the corridor outside the Veth rest area, and the patches were going, and the harmonic was going, and the other Veth cadets were trying to communicate with them, and making it worse because 3 additional sources of bioluminescent stress light in a small corridor was not a calming environment. Commander Vthali was at the far end of the shelter complex doing a duty check. I was moving toward the Veth corridor when Myra came out of the common space. She'd been sleeping. I don't know how she'd managed it, but she had, curled in that wrong-shaped seat, and she'd apparently heard the sound through sleep and come awake immediately. She was in the corridor in her socks, hair loose, still blinking, and she assessed the situation in about 2 seconds. She looked at me. I gave her the gesture that meant I don't know, you want to try something. She nodded and walked toward Cadet Finale. Now here is where I want to be careful, because what I'm about to describe was not a strategy. Myra did not sit down and calculate the optimal intervention. She just did what her instincts told her to do, and her instincts had been trained by a childhood full of storms and community shelters, and the specific grammar of sitting next to someone who's scared of the same thing you're scared of. She stopped about a meter away from Finale, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to feel absent. She said, in a voice I can only describe as at normal volume but very present, "Hey, Finale, I've got you." Finale's harmonic cut about 30% in intensity. The patches were still firing, but there was a flicker of blue recognition, attention, among the white-yellow chaos. "That sound," Myra said, and she paused. She was listening. The vibration of the storm through the walls was constant, immense, present. "That's the storm. It's doing what it does. It doesn't know we're here. It's not after us." She paused again. "I know it sounds, I know the sound of it is, it's a lot, I know, but we're 40 meters down, all of this rock between us and it." She paused again. "Just the rock, just us. Storm does its thing up there, we do our thing down here." Finale's harmonic dropped to a murmur. Myra sat down, on the floor, just sat down in the corridor, cross-legged in her socks. She looked up at Finale. She patted the floor next to her. I watched Cadet Finale, 21 years old. Veth, bioluminescent patches still flickering but slower now, more controlled, fold their tall frame down to the floor and sit next to Myra Vasquez. The other Veth cadets slowly backed away, giving space, which was the right instinct. Too much input had been the problem. Myra didn't say anything else for a while. She sat next to Finale and listened to the storm, and the bioluminescent patches cycled down slowly to a steady amber. Still stressed, but managed. After about 10 minutes, Finale said, in careful standard galactic, "You are not frightened." Myra thought about this. "I'm a little frightened," she said, "just not the part of me that's in charge right now." "Which part is in charge?" "The part that's been in storms before," Myra said. "The part that knows what to do." She paused. "You'll get there, not tonight maybe, but you'll get there." Finale was quiet. "My mother used to say something," Myra said. She'd say, "The storm has a beginning and it has an end. Your job is just to be here for both of them." The vibration of the Vthari storm moved through the rock above them, cycling and enormous and entirely indifferent to the 2 small beings sitting on a corridor floor 40 meters below it. Cadet Finale's patches settled into a slow, steady blue. Attention, presence, managing. The storm's peak came at hour 19. I know this because the monitoring systems told me, and because there was a point where the sound, even down here, even through all that rock, was not a sound anymore but a physical presence, a pressure you could feel in your chest, your teeth, the backs of your eyes. The lightning from above was reaching VIDA's electromagnetic absorbers at a rate that was sending the shelter power systems into periodic surges, small ones, controlled. But you'd feel the lights shift, and that rhythmic brightening and dimming had an effect on all of us. The Dulhari cluster had gone into their most contracted configuration. Barely moving, vibrational communication dropped to its slowest register. When Dulhari are really scared, their communication actually slows down, which is the opposite of Veth, because for Dulhari the survival response is total sensory reduction. Vordek and Gresh were still in their stillness. Had been for hours. I'd checked on them twice. Steady readings, internal. The human cadets, we were scattered mostly. Some sleeping, some reading, some sitting with the alien cadets in whatever configuration felt right. Cadet Yuan Jingfei had ended up in a long, technical conversation with a Veth cadet about the storm's electromagnetic properties, which was Jingfei's version of the same coping mechanism, filling the anxiety with information. And Myra was at the shelter's monitoring station. This is something I should explain. Every VIDA shelter has a monitoring station that displays real-time feeds from the surface sensors, atmospheric readings, structural integrity scores, visual feeds from the cameras that are rated to survive the storm, which are few and strategically placed. The visual feeds were mostly dark. The storm had zero visibility at surface level, as predicted, but occasionally a lightning strike would illuminate a section of the surface, and for half a second you'd see the outpost's exterior in stark white-blue light, the blast shields locked down, the surface scoured by wind, and then dark again. Myra was watching the feeds. She'd set up a small workspace, her datapad, a cup of the not-quite coffee, a stylus she kept spinning between her fingers when she was thinking. She was logging the atmospheric readings manually, cross-referencing them with a document I didn't immediately recognize. I came and stood next to her, looked at the document. It was a comparison table. On one side, Vthara storm data, current live. On the other side, historical hurricane data from Earth's meteorological archives, specifically the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean Basin records from the mid-21st century. "What are you doing?" I said. "Mapping it," she said. She pointed at a number on the Vthara side. "Wind shear coefficient, that's actually lower than a Category 5 Atlantic hurricane at this stage of the storm. The pressure drop is bigger but the rate of drop is slower, which means structurally it's less likely to cause rapid failure in properly rated materials." She pointed at another number. "Lightning frequency is wild, way beyond anything Earth's storm season does. But the electrical grounding characteristics of the rock here are different. The discharge dissipates faster. You're finding the parts of it that are less severe than home," I said. She looked up at me, something in her expression that was not quite a smile. "I'm finding the parts that I understand," she said, "because if I understand it, it's manageable, and if it's manageable, I can help the unit manage it." I looked at her. "Finale is doing better," she said, "but they'll need something concrete when they come out the other side of tonight. Some frame for what just happened that isn't we survived something unsurvivable, because that frame doesn't help you the next time." She went back to the data. "If I can show them, this is how it compares, this is what it is, this is why we're okay, that's more useful." I sat down next to her. For the next 4 hours, we sat at the monitoring station together while the Vthara storm moved overhead, and Myra mapped the storm in her datapad, and I watched the lightning feeds, and neither of us talked very much. And outside, 40 meters above our heads, one of the most powerful weather events in the explored galaxy, did exactly what it had always done, indifferent to every one of us below it. The storm ended at hour 67. I know the exact hour because Commander Vthara's made the announcement over the shelter comms, and I was already awake, sitting in the common space with a genuine cup of coffee I'd been saving for the occasion. The monitoring systems showed the atmospheric pressure returning to baseline. The wind velocity at surface level had dropped below 50 kilometers per hour, practically calm, by Vthara storm standards. The blast shields were assessed. Structural integrity across the outpost, 97%. 3 minor surface antenna arrays had taken damage. Nothing critical, nothing that hadn't been anticipated. The all-clear for surface access came at hour 70. This is the part I want you to understand. This is the part that I think about. When the shelter hatches opened and the first outside air came down, cold, sharp, with that copper-sweet smell that is Vthara at its most itself, there was a moment before anyone moved. A moment where the hatch was open and the stairs led up, and the storm was over and no one moved. And then Myra Vasquez walked to the bottom of the stairs, looked up at the rectangle of pale Vtharan sky visible through the hatch, and began climbing. She was the first one out. I followed her because that's my job, and because I wanted to see. The surface of Vthara Outpost 7 after a Vthara storm is something I don't have good words for. The sky was the deep, washed purple that Vthara gets after a major storm system. The clouds had been stripped and reassembled, and what remained was high, thin, luminous. The ground was scoured. The surface material was a compressed mineral mix that the storm had basically cleaned, taken down to its bare substrate, absolutely flat and almost reflective in the pale sun that was now emerging. The air was cold and moving fast, but gently fast, the last breath of the storm, and it had that smell, clean and ancient, like the planet had been turned over and its interior exposed for a moment. Myra was standing on the top step of the shelter hatch. She tilted her head back. She looked up at the sky. And she smiled, not the tiny, controlled smile she gave during debriefs and exercises. A real one. The kind that takes over a face. The kind that comes from somewhere genuine. "There it is," she said, to no one in particular, to the sky, to herself. "There's the other side." I heard movement behind me. Cadets coming up from the shelter. Cadet Finale, I could tell by the bioluminescent patches, which were running in a slow, uncertain blue, emerged and stopped at the top of the hatch, looking at the sky. Vordek came up behind them, moving slowly, his secondary eyelids adjusting to the light. He stopped next to me. We all stood there for a moment, looking at the post-storm surface of Vthara Prime. And then Vordek said in his flat, deliberate standard galactic, "Cadet Vasquez." Myra turned. "You called this storm," he said, "and I would like to record my exact words. You were correct. We survived it. The outpost survived it. And you were not afraid in a way that diminished your function. How is this possible for a species that evolved on a planet with comparable events?" Myra looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "We evolved because of the events, Vordek, not in spite of them." He processed this. "Your species," he said slowly, "was shaped by disaster." "Every species was," she said. "Yours too. It's just that ours kept coming, kept changing shape. We never got a break long enough to forget that the storm comes again." She looked back at the sky. "So we learned to be here for the beginning and the end." Vordek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something in crawl that his translator rendered imperfectly. The unit came out as respectful estimation, adjusted upward significantly. I later asked a crawl translation specialist what the original phrase actually meant, and she told me it was a specific crawl idiom used when a commander in the field demonstrates a quality that the speaker had not previously credited to them. It's a military phrase, originally. An acknowledgement from a soldier, to a leader that they were wrong about what that leader was capable of. Cadet Vordek crawl from a world 3 times Earth's gravity, where his species had evolved with a threat assessment biology so precise it was basically a superpower. Cadet Vordek looked at Mayra Vasquez, 23 years old, from Matagalpa, Nicaragua, and recalibrated. 3 days after the storm, Unit 7 was back on the standard training schedule. The outpost had been cleaned and repaired, and the sky was doing the pale, washed blue-purple thing it does in post-storm season when the high clouds are still fading. Everything smelled like that coppersweet, which I'd come to find deeply familiar after 11 months, and the light was at a particular angle that turned the scoured ground into something that flickered and shifted as you walked across it. I was doing my weekly observer log sitting in the monitoring station, which was my preferred writing place, quiet and slightly dim and with a view of the surface feeds. I was writing up my observations of Unit 7's storm response, which required me to record what I'd seen and describe it in the neutral, structured language of IDA documentation. Calm, functional, specific. I kept getting stuck on Mayra. Because there's a box in the observer log template called Exceptional Performance Circumstances. It's meant for things like outstanding tactical responses, unusual levels of competence under pressure, moments that should be flagged for training record purposes. I'd filled it in for cadets before. Standard entries. Clear, brief, documented. I sat looking at that box for a while. Then I wrote, Cadet M. Vasquez, Human Earth, demonstrated atypical crisis-adaptive behavior throughout the Vthara storm event. Notable, emotional management not achieved through suppression, crawl model, or increased social communication, Veth model, or sensory reduction, Dulhari model, but through active cognitive reframing of threat environment using prior experiential reference points. Cadet appeared to experience the event, including pre-storm conditions, with measurable positive affect alongside standard threat awareness. This did not impair function. It appears to have enhanced it. I stopped, read it back. It was accurate, but it was missing something. I deleted the last sentence and wrote instead. Cadet Vasquez's handling of Cadet Finale's acute stress response during storm peak was notable for its instinctive cross-species calibration, physical presence without invasion, verbal framing without condescension, experiential transfer without technical explanation. Outcome: Finale's stress response reduced significantly within 12 minutes. No specialist intervention required. Then I wrote, Observation: Cadets from Earth's high-weather frequency populations carry a form of storm resilience that is not captured in standard Earth Academy fitness evaluations. Recommend review of intake assessment criteria to document this as a discrete competency. Then I looked at all of it and thought, this is still not the thing. So I opened a personal note, not the official log, just a file I kept for myself, the kind that gets filed away and probably never read, and I wrote. She looked at the sky before the storm and called it beautiful. She sat on the floor with a scared alien cadet and said, I've got you. She watched the biggest storm in this sector of the galaxy from the monitoring station and mapped it against hurricane data from the Caribbean basin. She was the first one out of the shelter when the all-clear sounded, and she stood there in the stripped-clean post-storm morning and smiled. I've been stationed here for 11 months, and I've seen a lot of things about human beings that the other species find difficult to categorize. But I think what Mayra Vasquez showed the alien cadets of Unit 7 during the Vthara storm event was something specific and important. That there's a kind of person who wasn't just trained for disaster, who was made by it, not broken made, shaped by the thing that kept coming until the thing that kept coming became somehow home. Vordek recalibrated his estimation of Mayra by several significant notches. The Dulhari cluster changed their contact configuration around her. They leave a space for her now when they cluster, which is their way of including someone in their group. Finale asked her, 2 days after the storm, if she would be willing to talk them through the next storm when it comes, in 14 months. She said, "Sure," and then she said, "But you won't need me to. You'll remember you did it. That's the thing about the storm. Once you've been here for the beginning and the end, you know you can do it again." Myra Vasquez is 23 years old. She's from a town that got hit by storms her whole childhood. She looked at the biggest weather event on this planet and called it a nice day. I don't know what the other cadets will remember about VIDA in 20 years, but I think they'll remember her. The last thing I want to tell you happened 6 weeks after the storm, on a morning that was absolutely ordinary by VIDA standards. Pale sky, copper-sweet air, the sound of the landing pads coming online for the morning's incoming transport. Unit 7 was doing their morning physical conditioning, the usual cross-species balancing act that was unfair to everyone in different ways. Myra was running the perimeter circuit, which at VIDA is a 3-kilometer loop around the outpost's exterior that gives you a view, at certain points, of the far horizon. I was at the monitoring station when I saw her stop. On the feed from Camera 7, which covers the northeast perimeter, I saw Myra stop mid-stride on the circuit and stand still, looking at the horizon. I zoomed the camera in. The horizon was doing something. Way out, far enough that it was barely a smudge on the edge of visibility, there was a cloud formation. Early, preliminary, the very first suggestion of another weather system building. Nothing like the Vthara storm. Not even close. Just clouds, organizing themselves the way clouds do when they're thinking about becoming something. She stood there for a moment. Then she looked up at the sky, the way she'd looked up at it on the first day, when she'd gotten off the transport with her duffel on one shoulder and found those violet pre-storm clouds and smiled. She smiled again, the same smile. Then she turned around and kept running. And I sat at the monitoring station in the quiet of the post-storm outpost, with the pale Vtharan sun coming in through the narrow window at the angle it reaches in mid-morning. And I thought about all the ways you learn to be afraid of the world, and all the ways you learn to love it instead. And I thought, some people were built for the edge of things. For the place where the calm meets the storm and you have to decide, every single time, whether you're going to be broken by it or whether you're going to stand in the corridor and say, "I've got you." Whether you're going to be the person who goes inside when the sky shows its teeth or the person who presses their face to the glass. And I thought about a girl in Matagalpa, 9 years old, in a shelter listening to a hurricane, and instead of being broken, she was being built. The storm didn't know her name. It didn't need to. She already knew it.